Today marks 1 year since the encounter between Rochester police and Daniel Prude, an incident that rocked the city of Rochester when information and body cam video became public last September. Today, Black Lives Matter advocates are remembering that day in March.
Why did the good people of Rochester, Black Lives Matter, have to go back to March 23rd to find a case of alleged police brutality? Now, we all know the shift that happened May 26th after George Floyd was killed. And all the cities were looking for a case of police brutality or police shooting an unarmed black man in their city, in their jurisdiction. Now, there's 17,985 police departments in this country, working 365 days a year. They don't take a day off. No holidays for the police. Why did Rochester have to go back to March? Why couldn't they find one May 27th, May 28th, May 29th, on and on and on and on? Why did they have to wait until September to just say, crap, the election's coming up. We need a case of a black guy that got killed by the police, or a black guy that got beat up by the police, or a black guy that had a bad interaction with the police. And they went back to March 23rd, 2020, and destroyed their city, which is already a poverty-stricken, rough, underdeveloped, not a lot of resources, not a lot of jobs up there. And why did they destroy their city over a guy who had a bad interaction with cops in March 23rd of that year? Makes you think that maybe the police aren't really that bad.
Prude, an incident that rocked the city of Rochester when information and body cam video became public last September. Today, Black Lives Matter advocates are remembering that day in March with a celebration of life. And they started early this morning in downtown Rochester, then marched to the East Ave Wegmans. That's where we find Atia Collins, who has been with the group most of the day. She joins us now live. Atia, what's today's message?
Well, Adam, the group actually moved here to Child Street after they left East Ave Wegmans. You can see behind me, it's a celebration of life. That's today's message. You can hear the music, there's food, and the atmosphere here is just very joyful, good energy. Now, today, like I said, they are remembering Daniel Prude, who he was. They're also celebrating some of the successes that have come from the movement.
Do you notice anything strange or anything demographically about this group of people that came out here in a very rough city? I mean, Rochester hood, man. They got some steppers up there, man. Do you notice anything about this group of people that's out here protesting and making a fuss about defunding the police and bad-mouthing the police and talking about how bad black folk got it and an institution of racism, systematic this and systematic that? Do you notice anything about the demographics in this group that's a bit odd?
Well, Adam, the group actually moved here to Child Street after they left East Ave Wegmans. You can see behind me, it's a celebration of life. That's today's message. You can hear the music, there's food, and the atmosphere here is just very joyful, good energy. Now, today, like I said, they are remembering Daniel Prude, who he was. They're also celebrating some of the successes that have come from the movement, and they're pointing to changes that still need to be made. A year after the incident that led to the death of Daniel Prude, protests are still raging on.
The officers still have their job. We seen that he was murdered in cold blood, and that's why we're out here.
Free the People Rochester, along with the Community Justice Initiative, started the day downtown at Parcel 5. Leaders talked about the city's police reform plans and how to expand mental health programs like the People in Crisis team. Many here feel the PIC team is not making genuine change in the community.
And all of the incidents that have happened, subsequently since the several meetings have happened, we have not seen them respond. So that means that we need to go back to RPD and we need to cross-train them to be more humane. We need to cross-train them to be more open-minded and less reactionary.
The group then marched down East Avenue, heading to the East Avenue Wegmans. The Wegmans was forced to close and customers exited out the rear of the store while protesters set up tables and played music out front. Protest leaders say they picked Wegmans as a way to disrupt commerce and bring more attention to the movement. Also, they say Wegman policies contribute to an oppressive system.
Wegmans actively employs the police. Every time we come here to shop, anytime our neighbors and our friends come here, the police is here.
What kind of terrible person do you have to be? I mean, just the scum of the earth. The day after a POC assailant went into a grocery store in Boulder, Colorado, and mowed down 10 suspected supremacists. What kind of person do you have to be to complain about police being at a grocery store? Forget the fact about the crime wave that's swept all across this country and hit Rochester really, really hard. We're going to get into that in a minute. Crime in Rochester is off the hook. People don't feel safe in Rochester. I've been to Rochester a few times. I may be heading up there soon. Got family out there, Greece, Albion, Holly, all those little areas out there. It's a Rochester's a very, very hood place. They steppers. They bout it. I put them against anybody. Their hood, their gangsta ain't taking a backseat to nobody. Crime is serious up there. But forget that. Just think about a guy went into a supermarket the day before this protest and mowed down a bunch of shoppers. And she's whining about the police being in the grocery store.
Protest leaders say they picked Wegmans as a way to disrupt commerce and bring more attention to the movement. Also, they say Wegman policies contribute to an oppressive system.
Wegmans actively employs the police. Every time we come here to shop, anytime our neighbors and our friends come here, the police is here. Also, we wanted to make sure that we did something that stopped commerce today. We have to let people know that we pay taxes and we want change, we want justice, and we want it right now.
Some of that change that they are asking for includes defunding the Rochester Police Department, firing the officers involved in Daniel Prude's encounter, and also improving the response to mental health calls through legislation like Daniel's Law. Reporting in Rochester, Tia Collins.
All right, so these sisters obviously aren't aware of the things going on in their city and the rampant crime that's going on in their city. And the fact that many people, obviously not them, but other people don't feel safe in their city and we actually appreciate more police. Let's see some stories from Rochester. So hopefully if those sisters happen to see this video, it can help them and they can be, made aware of what's really going on in their city. And maybe they can focus maybe some of their attention on those situations. So we got Rochester police. A fatal shooting on Forbes Street is the city's 10th homicide. Last year through March 23rd, there were only 5 homicides. So the murder rate has doubled since they defunded the police. And they really have done a number on their police department up there. They forced the black police chief to resign last year after this. And they got a new chief in there, and they cut all types of resources from the cops and all type of units and all types of things. So that's led to the murder rate doubling in the city. Oh, Here's an interesting story. Rochester man arrested and accused of headbutting an officer and threatening police.
Rochester police say that an officer was assaulted tonight while putting a suspect into a patrol car. This incident started on Bay Street when a man with a knife charged at them and asked them to shoot him. Officers say they were able to talk him into dropping the knife, but police say he then violently headbutted an officer while the officer was putting him into the car. That officer was treated. The suspect is charged with assault. The person in crisis team was requested but could not respond because the suspect was armed.
So this man in Rochester asked police to shoot him, headbutted an officer, pulled a knife on officers, injured another officer, and wasn't killed. And ladies and gentlemen, this happens every day in all 17,985 police jurisdictions in this country. Police officers are dealing with this every day. They called the crisis response team, which is, the social workers, but you heard what he said. The social worker, they couldn't come because the suspect was armed. So now what happens when the crisis response team is called because the suspect's not armed because the knife's in his pocket? And then the crisis response team gets there and the subject pulls the knife out. What happens then? Did they even think that far ahead? But at least they didn't send the social workers out because the guy was armed. At least they didn't do that. Okay, guys, quick reminder. Take a moment to take the $5 challenge and support this channel and the hard work we do to bring you these news stories every night and cover what the mainstream media won't cover. We don't have the same budget as CNN or MSNBC, but we do appreciate all you guys' support and all you guys who have taken the $5 challenge in the past and all you guys who will take it in the future. So remember, take the $5 challenge via PayPal, via the Cash App, and if you're watching this during a premiere, you can also take the $5 challenge via the Super Chat. Thank you, and we look forward to continuing to bring you the news that you deserve every night. On to the life and death of the great Daniel Prude, the man who's inspired the first real protests of the Biden administration. Because we know the liberals, the leftists, the progressives, they put a moratorium on protesting. Well, Biden was getting his footing, no pun intended, as he was taking over as president of the United States. But they just can't fight the urge. They gotta go out and destroy things to make people feel uncomfortable like they did at the Wegmans. People, scared shoppers scurrying out the back door of the Wegmans as peaceful protesters gathered out front. But let's learn a little bit about this guy who inspired this. Daniel T. Prude, born September 20th, 1978, died March 30th, 2020. Now you're saying, but the incident happened March 23rd. I thought he died March 23rd. Well, no. He died 7 days later in the hospital. We'll get to that in a second. So Daniel Prude arrived in Rochester, New York from Chicago on March 22nd. Yes, the day before he died was the first day he had been in Rochester. And these people acting like this guy was like their native son. He was Rochester's own. He went to such and such high school. He's from such and such neighborhood. His grandmother, no. This dude set foot in Rochester March 22nd, the day before he died, visiting his older brother, Joe Prude. Daniel acted erratically upon his arrival, jumping headfirst down a flight of stairs. I mean, who hasn't jumped headfirst down a flight of stairs? I mean, you haven't lived until you've jumped headfirst down a flight of stairs. So I'm going to give him a pass on that one. His brother dialed emergency services for help. Well, this wasn't in the... I never heard Black Lives Matter talk about this during all the protests in Rochester when they were running up on people in restaurants and taking their food and flipping their tables and chasing them out of restaurants. I never heard of none of this. So after St. Daniel flew down the steps, levitated down the steps head first, his brother dialed emergency services for help. Why did this brother just show compassion and I don't know why his brother didn't do that, didn't help him, but brother called emergency services. Daniel received a mental health evaluation at Strong Memorial Hospital and was released that night. Well, hold on, wait a second. What? So the brother called the emergency services, the guy got a mental health evaluation that night and was released? Wow, that's a lot of tax dollars. At least if you pay taxes in Rochester, like that lady was saying, at least you know your tax dollars is getting used up. Within several hours, Daniel resumed his erratic behavior and fled his brother's house around 3 a.m. So wait a second. He ain't even been there 24 hours. So he shows up on the 22nd, I'm presuming during the day sometime, and by 3 a.m. that next morning, he's running around the streets naked. Wow. So in less than a day, half a day in Rochester, he jumped down the steps head first, had emergency services called on him. You know what that is, goddamn police. They took him to a hospital for a mental evaluation, didn't lock him up. He got a mental evaluation, was released, came back home, started acting crazy again, and then ran out the house at 3 a.m. And this is the guy that they're chasing customers out of Wegmans in Rochester yesterday over. His brother called emergency services again for assistance. Why do they keep calling it emergency service? We know they been called 911. Why they keep... Daniel Prude shed his long underwear. Listen to the wording. He shed his long underwear, tank top, and socks while on the street. A passerby recorded a Facebook Live video of Prude after he begged someone to call emergency services. But Prude ran away when the person called. So his brother's begging people to call emergency services. Please call emergency services, aka the 1250 pigs. Call the pigs. My brother has shed his long underwear, his tank top, and his socks. My brother's acting erratically and has shed his long underwear. Someone please call emergency services. Yeah, that's how I bet that's how it went. Man, someone call emergency services. My brother shed his long underwear. So, the brother was screaming for somebody to call the cops. Brother Daniel ran away. At 3:16, multiple officers and 2 emergency medical technicians arrived at Daniel Prude's location in southwest Rochester, where he was walking naked and bleeding. Now, I don't know about you, but I know a couple of guys who would have been offended if they with their wife or had their kids outside and then some dude come walking down the street swinging and jangling all over the place, butterball naked, through their neighborhood. But anyway, this brother walking through somebody else's neighborhood, because we know he just arrived in Rochester half a day before. So we know that's not his neighborhood. He walking through somebody else's neighborhood where their kids and their wives are, walking down the street just swinging. One officer exited his car and approached Prude, pointing a taser at him while asking him 6 times to get on the ground. Prude complied and was then asked by the officer to put his hands behind his back, to which he also complied. During the arrest, he said, "Yes, sir," several times to the officer while handcuffed and on the ground. Such a great guy. He just complied. And yes, sir. He ain't do nothing wrong. Why are these cops just messing with him for no reason? While handcuffed on the ground, Prude repeatedly said, "In Jesus Christ I pray, amen," among various other comments. Around 3:19 a.m., 3 minutes after he's been encountered by the cops, Prude became agitated, spitting at officers and yelling, "Give me that gun." Okay. That escalated quickly. That escalated really quickly. Until one officer placed a spit hood over Prude's head. Now, a spit hood is mesh. You can breathe. It's breathable. It's beyond breathable. It's only to prevent spit from a guy who you don't know. This is after the pandemic, but still, even before the pandemic, there was still a lot of other things that you wouldn't want just some random person who's already spitting on you to get on you. Even before the pandemic. This has nothing to do with the pandemic. Officers don't know these people. They don't know these people from a can of paint. They got wives and families they got to go home to. They can't be letting you spit on them. So they got, especially when you're bleeding. This guy's bleeding and he's spitting. So they put the breathable spit hood over his head. Where there's no way you can choke. Zero way you can choke. Actually, it's easy to choke without the spit hood, because once the spit hood's over your face, there's nothing. You can't get anything in your mouth. So you couldn't choke on anything. Actually, spit hood would prevent you from choking, because nothing could get lodged in your throat, because nothing can fit through the mesh. So a spit hood is put over his head to protect the officers. Prude demanded that they remove it. 1 minute later, Prude unsuccessfully attempted to stand up before being repeatedly pushed over by officers, who forcibly held him down for approximately 2 minutes and 15 seconds. That's almost actually a fourth of the time. What was it, 8 minutes and 46 seconds George Floyd was held down? Wow. Officer Mark Vaughn used his body weight in both hands to press the side of Prude's head to the pavement. Vaughn's report called this a hypoglossal nerve technique, which according to USA Today involves jamming fingers into the nerve below the jaw to cause pain and persuade the subject to comply. Officer Troy Talladay, R.I.P. Roy Halladay, great picture, but Officer Troy Talladay applied his knee to Prude's back. Another officer held Prude's legs. At the start of the hold, Prude said, "You're trying to kill me." Officers noticed liquid coming from Prude's mouth as he stopped speaking and moving. As Vaughn released his hold, he said, "You good now?" Prude did not respond. Vaughn then pushed on his head with one hand for 45 seconds while attending officers chatted. 3 minutes and 10 seconds after the restraint began, one officer remarked that he had been vomiting during the restraint and his chest compressions appeared to have stopped. The Associated Press reported that police leaders pressed Rochester to keep the video of Prude's death secret, fearing a violent blowback if the video came out during the nationwide George Floyd protests. An emergency medical technician asked the officers to turn Prude on his back. Acknowledging that Prude was unresponsive, he instructed the officer to apply CPR, which he did. At 3:27 a.m., Prude was placed into an ambulance. While in transport to Strong Memorial Hospital, his heartbeat resumed, but he remained incapacitated from lack of oxygen and was later declared brain dead. He was taken off life support a week later after the arrest on March 30th. So that incident led to this. Later on that year, in September of 2020, as we approached the election day and the liberals needed more protests and riots to create a sense that the U.S. was just this race-ridden, bigoted, evil place. I was just emboldening police to go around killing black people for no reason. Okay, so back to today. Back to the present Rochester. And they're experiencing some issues in Rochester. So this isn't quite a mass shooting, but this was like a mini mass shooting. 3 hospitalized after shooting in Rochester. They found 2 victims, a boy 16 and a woman 54. That's what I tell you about the black community. Anybody can get it. A boy 16 and a woman 54. Both shot at least once. They were taken to area hospital and the injuries are non-life-threatening. Shortly after, a 21-year-old man arrived at Rochester General Hospital with a gunshot wound. His injuries were non-life-threatening. And no arrests have been made. Anyone with any information should call 911. So they're having some issues in Rochester other than Daniel Prude that are going completely unaddressed. Now, as you see, Rochester is a very chocolate city, man. They got a lot of, listen, New York got 20%, and you see what's happening in New York. You see who's doing it, and you see the stories, and you see the police reports and the victim surveys, and you see the gun memorial in New York City. New York City, 23% black. Chicago, 30%. Okay? Los Angeles, 9%. Rochester is 39.8%. Basically 40%. But that's a lot of black folk there. Okay? They got a lot of black folk up there in Rochester. And they had to find a guy who had spent 12 to 18 hours in their city. A guy from Chicago who spent 12 to 18 hours in their city before he died in police custody. Well, before he died after being in police custody 7 days later. That was their case for defunding their police in their city. They defunded their police, which led to their city's murder rate doubling this year to date. Completely doubled this year to date, after they defunded their police and marginalized their police department over a guy who spent no more than 18 hours in their city before he died, essentially. In a city that's 40% black. They couldn't find nobody else, no other cases. Here we are, the Rochester Gun Memorial. Who's died in Rochester? Okay, got some Hispanics. Some whites. Then you see who's really dying. Look at all these murders. Look at all these faces. You would think that this city was 97% black.
It has been 1 year now since Daniel Prude was restrained by Rochester police officers, an encounter that led to his death a week later. Today, activists marched across the city demanding justice for Prude. One stop for the demonstrators was the East Avenue Wegmans. We have team coverage tonight. Tanner Jubinville standing by. But first, as 13 Wham's Andrew Banis reports, today's protest prompted that grocery store to shut down. Andrew? Yeah, Doug, the protest actually started downtown Rochester. It moved from there to the RTS Transit Center, and then the activists marched up East Avenue before arriving here. Their goal today was to disrupt and to make sure people were paying attention to this cause.
Be here for a while, and that's just what it is. Wegmans gonna be closed today.
Ashley Gant with Free the People Rock says the East Avenue Wegmans was specifically picked to draw more attention to their calls for justice and reform at City Hall and the Rochester Police Department.
We wanted to make sure that we did something that stopped commerce today.
It was 1 year ago Daniel Prude was handcuffed and restrained by Rochester police during a mental health crisis. He died 1 week later.
The police officers that murdered Daniel Prude, they don't live in our community. They don't. Our kids don't go to school with our kids. They live in these communities. They shop in this area.
Demonstrators started the day at Parcel 5 downtown. From there, they traveled to the RTS Transit Center, blocking buses from leaving, but helping those who needed rides to work. Then they marched down East Avenue, stopping in the Wegmans parking lot. The front doors to the store were locked. Employees and customers were let out of alternative exits.
So we want to make sure that when we're disrupting traffic, that when we're, advocating and raising our voices, that we're not singing to the choir. And when we're doing it in our communities, we're singing to the choir because we are the people that's being traumatized. We are the people that's being brutalized.
For hours, dozens of protesters remained outside, hanging up signs and chalking messages on the ground. 1 year after the Daniel Prude tragedy, activist Naya Shabazz says they'll keep protesting until changes come.
We still fighting for justice. We're still begging in a sense for justice. It shouldn't be.
And Doug, the protesters remained here until about 4:30 this evening. After that, for about the past hour, cleaning crews were here wiping off the chalk and taking down the flyers that were hung on the windows. Wegmans says they will not be opening this branch again until tomorrow morning. Reporting live in Rochester, Andrew Banis, 13 WHAM News.